What is going on, Ape Nation? So I ran across something that I really wanted you guys to see today. A guy named Marc Cohodes ran a hedge fund for over 25 years, and now he's willing to spill the beans. He talks about Citadel Securities. He talks about Melvin Capital. He talks about Goldman Sachs. All that in just one interview. So I wanted to share this interview with you guys today as soon as I ran across it. And I've uploaded half of it already, and this is what you're going to be watching right here, right now. This is going to be part one, and I'll be uploading the second part of this interview as you guys are watching this. Hopefully, it'll be up as soon as you're done watching this, but this is good stuff. I hope you enjoy it, and we're going to get into it right away. Before we do, please remember to smash that like button so that the YouTube algorithm shares this with as many apes out there as possible, because everybody needs to see this. Everybody needs to know this. And of course, if you're new here and haven't subscribed already, I don't know what you're waiting for. You're going to get content just like this from me every single day. And that's a promise. That's a fact, Jack. So go ahead and subscribe. I will see you guys after the video.
An ex-hedge fund operator who has seen the stock market's dirty business from the inside. Marc got a BS in finance from Babson College, a business school in Wellesley, Massachusetts. In 1985, he took a job in New York with David Rocker, who just started a hedge fund that would come to specialize in short selling. He worked at the hedge fund for 25 years, during which time he became a partner, and when Rocker left, turned the operation into Copper River. He has a reputation of using shorts to spear the bad guys. Now he's a private investor. He lives in Montana. Welcome, Marc. We're going to talk about some history, your history going back to the mid-2000s, and then the present. Viewers will see how your experience has given you a window on some of the big players that run the market and how they do it.
Well, first of all, Lucy, thanks for having me. It was, I'm honored that you would call me and have me on your program. And I have strong opinions on what's going on in these dirty markets. And it's really an honor, Lucy, to talk to you about this, to flush some of this bullshit out.
Marc, let's start by you explaining the difference between shorting and naked shorting, why you think the first is valid, sometimes can do good. For example, you have exposed corruption by companies. In some cases, the company officials ended up being sent to jail for securities fraud.
Naked shorting is flat out illegal, and it's against the law. And a guy like myself, an individual, cannot short a stock, whether you have an account at Goldman, Morgan Stanley, Shearson, Interactive Brokers. You cannot short a stock without a borrow. You cannot enter the order.
Please explain what to short a stock means.
Well, what short a stock, I always use this to explain the concept of shorting to people as young as 10 years old. If I think the price of cows are too high and I don't own any cows, I go to a cow farm, a cow raiser, and say, can I borrow your cows? I'll give you back your cows at a certain period of time, and I'll give you some interest on the money that the cow is worth. Don't worry, I'm good for it, but I'm just going to borrow your cows. And the farmer says, no problem, you can borrow my cows. I then go in the open market and sell the cows for, let's just say, $100 a piece. Turn over the cows. Price of cows goes down to 50. I buy the cows back, give the cows back to the farmer. I make $50 per cow. If I'm wrong and the price of cows go to 150, and I think I'm wrong, I buy the cows back at 150, return the cows, and I lose $50 per. Now, I can't sell a cow and can't deliver a cow that's not in my possession. So I cannot short a stock. An individual cannot short a stock unless you can borrow the shares. That is flat out, full stop, 100% true. So when people, for example, with GameStop accuse Melvin of being naked short GameStop, it's 100% false. He was not naked short GameStop. He was short GameStop and or short GameStop through derivatives, and he was stupid enough to be too big in that trade, press the trade, and he lost his ass. and was brutally and probably mortally from a business career embarrassed and finished.
That's the name of a company, not a person, correct?
Melvin is the name of a fund, right? That was infamously known to be short GameStop. A lot of people accuse him of being naked short the stock. He wasn't. He was just short the stock.
Well, what is naked short then? You explain what short was. What is naked short?
Naked short is shorting a stock without a borrow. It happens to be legal in Canada. It happens to be legal in other parts of the world. It is 100% flat out, full stop, illegal in the United States. Now, there's ways around it that brokerage firms like Goldman Sachs and others use. And I'm not a security regulator, so I can't exactly enforce the laws. But does it go on a brokerage firm level, option market making level? 100% it does. But people like myself and hedge funds and people who short stocks cannot be naked short the stock. If they short a stock, they have got to have the stock borrowed. So anyone who tries to tell you differently is a liar.
Well, okay, so shorting can sometimes it is legal and it can do some good. But suppose, even without naked shorting, what about bear raids to torpedo share prices? That is, traders colluding, collaborating, piling on to drive prices down. Or short and distort operations where traders put out fake news to drive prices down. For example, the Street CNBC stock guru Jim Cramer said in an interview, December 2006, a lot of times when I was short at my hedge fund, meaning I needed a stock down, I would create a level of anxiety. Cramer said a hedge fund manager's favorite tactic is to give a rumor about a stock to an unwitting reporter at the Wall Street Journal or CNBC, he said, and hope that it moves the stock in the direction he wants. Cramer said some tactics are, quote, blatantly illegal, but sometimes essential for poorly performing hedge funds. And want you to take a look at the clip where he says all that.
So let's say I were short. What I would do is I would hit a lot of guys with RIM. Now you can't foment. That's a violation of
foment.
Yeah, you can't foment. You can't create yourself an impression that a stock's down. But you do it anyway because the SEC doesn't understand it.
Nobody else talked about it.
Right, but what's important when you're in that hedge fund mode is to not do anything remotely truthful. Because the truth is so against your view that it's important to create a new truth, to develop a fiction. And I think it's important for people to recognize that the way that the market really works is to have that nexus of hit the brokerage houses with a series of orders that can push it down, then leak it to the press. And then get it on CNBC. That's also very important. And then you have a kind of a vicious cycle down.
Right.
And, by the way, no one else in the world would ever admit that, but I can care.
That's right. And you can say that here.
I can't. I'm not going to say it on TV.
Well, he did. Mark, how do you deal with that?
That's an awful lot to boil down. So let's start at the top. Let's get into shorting 101, and then we'll get into Cramer, who now is a big-time guy at CNBC. So I find that video ironic. So I'm going to speak about myself, and I'm going to speak about the 2 to 4 people who I actually think do this properly and do this the right way in this business. So I'm 61 years old. I started doing this in '82 at the Northern Trust. I worked with David Rocker starting in 1985, moved to California in 91, retired in 2010. Single-handedly, I've probably put more people, more CEOs and operators in prison than anyone in the free world. Single-handedly, I'm probably responsible for more SEC investigations and fines toward companies than anyone alive in the free world. I'm not living on 20 years ago like some. My last person who I went after was a guy named Parker Petit, who was the CEO of MiMedx, and he's going to be going to prison a week from today.
Well, let me ask you a specific, getting back to what Kramer said. You and Rocker Partners were sued in 2005 on just that kind of a charge by Patrick Byrne, who was the CEO of Overstock. He said on August 8th, 2005, I bought 25,000 shares of OSTK, that's Overstock. My broker was unable to settle the trade and said Morgan Stanley refused to deliver with statements to the effect that you have to understand this is a very hot stock. By hot, apparently they mean, Byrne said, a stock in which cheating is being allowed. And he said 50 days after the trade, Morgan Stanley finally delivered. Now, 4 days after the fail to deliver, he filed suit against Gradient Analytics, Rocker Partners, David Rocker, and you. He said Rocker Partners worked with Gradient, a research firm, to manipulate Overstock shares. He said journalists were involved, and the whole scheme was being orchestrated by a master criminal he called the Sith Lord, but declined to identify. Was the charge true?
Now, people in the Kramer video, if Kramer did that when he was at a hedge fund, it's patently illegal. But that's up to the SEC and the DOJ to do their job. I'm not a law enforcement guy. I don't prosecute people. I can give tips to the government and they're going to go about doing that stuff. But that video about Kramer is absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And if it goes on, those people should be banned from the business. And how Kramer has a job at CNBC after that kind of hysterical thing is beyond me. Back in 2005, my ex-partner David Rocker and Patrick Byrne got into a pissing match about the fundamentals at Overstock. And the stock went from somewhere around 40, I think it went to 80. It was a massive squeeze. At the time, we lost our ass and we're losing our ass in Overstock. Overstock was a hard borrow. But as a customer of Goldman Sachs at the time, we had legally borrowed all our shares from Goldman and were paying a very hefty negative rebate, very hefty negative rebate. I'm offended that you would say this was like what Kramer said. It had nothing to do with what Kramer said because everything we publicly said about Overstock not only was true, it actually happened. And we had basis for it. So we weren't telling stories to push down the price of Overstock stock. Price of Overstock stock was going up because Byrne was hyping the thing. So I find it offensive that you would say that what we did and why we got sued was what Kramer said. That's 100% false. And I would like you to take that back, Lucy.
Well, no, I'm saying it seemed to, the charge was similar. And then I was...
The charge had nothing to do with it.
I thought the lawsuit was that Rocker Partners work with Gradient.
No. The lawsuit was specifically that David Rocker wrote the reports for Gradient, and we front ran the reports or did whatever bullshit he accused us of, right?
I mean, that's sort of the same thing in different language.
So here's the nature of the story. Byrne got a former employee of Gradient to lie for him in a deposition. I think the guy's name was Anafanis. And Gradient settled with him to get out of the suit. We were sued, I think the number was, we were sued for $1 billion in the lawsuit. And we settled the suit after Byrne lost all his motions. We settled the suit for $7 million, which was less than the cost to take the suit to trial. So when he first asked for $1 billion, he then lowered his offer to $100 million to 50. And I said, you'll get no more than 5. He said, how about 7? And we settled. Now, after that, and years later, after my run-in with Goldman, Byrne felt guilty and then some. And he apologized to me of what he did because he said it was wrong. And he said the crazy part of it is the day after he filed suit, his systems completely blew up and the company fell apart. And the stock did go from 80, Lucy, it went to 2.
Oh.
Okay, so what we said about Overstock at the time, everything we said was 100% true. If you've ever been in a lawsuit, and I've been in many on both sides, I've been a defendant and a plaintiff, they're not a lot of fun. And if you can settle something that you're sued for $1 billion for $7 million when it costs you 10 to take it to trial, I think you do that 24/7. So everything that Byrne accused us of was wrong. Everything he accused us of was false. And frankly, when I saw Byrne once during a deposition, we were taking a piss in a bathroom, and he was saying that he heard I was a good father, and I say, yeah. And I said, Patrick, you have this all wrong. It's not us with the can't borrow the shares. It's not us, because we're being charged to borrow the shares, and we can't short the stock unless we borrow the shares. We cannot short them, Patrick, unless we can borrow them. You should take your issues to the prime brokers. It had everything to do with Byrne's view, and he was right about the naked shorting, and naked shorting was not enforced back in that period. The rules changed 2008, 2009-ish, and this was in the 2004-5 period. Rules were very different back then, and rules changed. But Byrne at least had the common sense to listen to me, and instead of going for the hedge funds, he went after the prime brokers. He went after the prime brokers, and he sued Goldman and Merrill and Morgan and all these guys. And it was basically because I told him what was really going on.
So he filed a suit, just as you said, in 2007 against Goldman and 11 other prime brokers, alleging massive illegal stock market manipulation. The case would go on for 8 years, wasn't settled till 2015, and you would play an important role in it, giving testimony in 2011. So let's look at your connection, talk about your connection to Goldman. You have said your fund had paid Goldman $100 million over the years to borrow shares. Why did Copper River rely on Goldman to handle short sales, including Overstock, rather than perhaps some other broker?
Well, those are really good questions. You have your numbers wrong. We didn't pay Goldman $100 million over the years. We paid Goldman $100 million a year in some years to borrow the shares. Okay, and it used to be in the real world that people's words were good, and that people would not actually knowingly break the law for money to enable you to do your business. All Goldman had to say to us at any point in time is, we can't borrow those shares. They synthetically created shares. They didn't have the shares borrowed in retrospect, and they charged us huge fees. We paid huge fees for a service that was never provided. And when the government changed the rules without warning and saying you can't be short stocks for more than 4 days without a borrow, Goldman was absolutely fucked. Absolutely fucked. So instead of finding the shares which they couldn't find, they bought us in. But the lawsuit that Byrne filed against Goldman stemmed, and Merrill and others, stemmed from the primes, the brokers not borrowing the shares at that time. And where I played a role in it was, I couldn't stand Goldman at the time. I can't stand them now. I think they are just, I don't need to get sued again, but they are a bunch of bad hombres. And anytime the DOJ wants to go after them, I'm more than willing to help. So I couldn't stand Goldman. And at the time, I wasn't exactly pals with Byrne. We later became pals. That's another story for another day. But I couldn't stand Byrne. So I was subpoenaed for this deposition, and I hated the left and I hated the right. I hated Goldman and I hated Byrne.
Can we back up a bit about what Goldman did to you? Because you spoke at the deposition in 2011, but there's stuff that happened in 2008, which I think is important to set the stage about what Goldman was doing even to its own clients. So could you, and that happened because of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and you had assets in Lehman Brothers, but it was Lehman Brothers London, and you weren't able to get to your assets. And a whole slew of things happened, could you talk about that? Because this is where Goldman, who supposedly was your broker and committed to you, seemed to turn against you.
Well, I'll address it. It's always painful to address this shit, but for you, I will. And I want you to remember something, Lucy. Later in the interview, let's bring back Goldman as it relates to Robinhood, because the situations are very simple. Okay, so really, in the short version with Goldman is the SEC and government changed the rules on shorting and being able to be short something without a borrow. Goldman didn't have a borrow, and basically forced us against our will to cover shares in basically all our names against our will as the market was collapsing. And we took a very wonderful year. We were up 35%. And when the market was flat to up, we had the deal geared to collapse. The market did collapse, but in the meantime, Goldman took us out of our stuff and we closed the year down a mere 50. There have been articles written about this. I urge people to Google me and Goldman Sachs. There's been books written about it. There's been a lot discussed. So anyone who's really interested in what happened with me and Goldman Sachs, there's a lot of places to find it. It was a horrifically bad period. It only occurred because we had collateral that was stuck at Lehman, and Goldman knew they could push us around. And people need to know simply that we weren't on margin as margin as the Melvin guys were when they had bad times. But the house, and in this term it was Goldman, can change margin requirements internally that gives you, in fact, a margin call. So the average house lets you have 30 cents of equity on the dollar for a dollar's worth of equities. That's what Goldman's rule was when you were short stocks. We were only short, let's say 80% in our fund, so we weren't even fully cashed in. But when we started doing poorly because they ran up our names, they changed the haircut from 30 to 70, which they then said, I tried to raise money and they worked hard against it. They basically said, we have to take you out of these names. So Goldman then didn't have to worry about the borrow because we weren't short boo. And we had one small managed account, which wasn't dependent on Goldman. And I think that fund closed up, or that account closed up, I think 110% that year. And the Goldman stuff was down, I think 50.
Well, I understand that you tried to get another fund, Farrell and Capital, to take over your position. And Goldman prevented that. You tried to go to another bank. Goldman
prevented that. So everything I did to keep things going, because I thought things were going to collapse, and they actually did. Goldman went out of their way to make sure it happened. And the funny thing is, all those people who along the way at Goldman who were in on that decision, shortly thereafter, all left Goldman. They all went to far-reaching parts of the earth. Some are no longer in the business. And again, there have been a lot of lengthy podcasts on this. There's books written about this. There's all sorts of stuff that have all sorts of gory details about Goldman. So I absolutely hate Goldman. I absolutely can't stand them to this day. I draw a lot of parallels right now between Goldman and Citadel. I draw parallels between Goldman and Robinhood. And as it segues now ask your deposition question.
Okay, well, I want to know, what did it cost you in your business, the firm, yourself, the fact that Goldman did this to your firm and to the stocks?
Well, they basically took a $2 billion business and made it a $1 billion business, and I sent all the money back. Personally, I'm not going to get into the money that it cost me, but it was a 9-figure sum. So it was significant.
You suggested you think they did this because they actually had not borrowed the shares, that you had paid them. And what makes you think that that's the case?
Well, I know it's the case.
How?
I know it's the case because post fact, after I did the deposition for Overstock and Goldman, and Byrne, prevailed eventually, he sent my lawyer information and emails from Goldman where were specifically mentioned